So we continue a series called Here I Am Today. And I was like, Adam's muting me to be funny. I can tell. It's a good job. Well played. Well played. I'm just kidding. We're in a series called Here I Am. And it's through the story of Moses in Exodus. And last week we kind of opened up the idea, just asking the question, can people still hear from God? And the truth is, there's been times in our life where we've all probably accompanied or encountered someone who said, God told me. And when they say this statement, God told me, my first response is, well, how did you hear him? Like, did he tell you through thunder? Did he tell you by like you getting pulled over by a cop? You shouldn't be speeding, you know? Did he tell you by like a whisper, an audible voice? Did he tell you like through like rain or weather? How did God speak to you? How did God tell you? And then maybe you've experienced the next level of God told me. God told me to tell you. And when I hear this phrase, my first response is, well, can you tell God to tell me? That's what I want to hear from God. But we've gone through life. And the truth is, regardless if you're a Christ follower or not, the belief is that if God still speaks, I would really love to know what he sounds like. I want to know that I'm hearing him. Because many of us have approached God. We've cried out to God. We've begged God, can you hear me? Do you see what I'm going through? Please answer my prayer. From the, God, I promise I'll study next time if you help me pass this test. Or God, I promise I won't do this anymore if you'll get me out of that. Or God, if you just would save this or restore that. God, would you make ends meet? We've all probably been in moments where we've cried out to God. We've begged him, do you hear me? Can you hear me, God? Only to maybe hear silence. And it begins to cause us to question, what am I doing? What am I missing? How are they hearing God, but I'm not? And we came to this truth last week. This truth that for most of us, when we want to hear from God, we're actually trying to get his attention, not give him ours. That for many of us, when we're wanting God to speak, we're trying our best to get his attention. Do you hear me, God? Do you see me? Can you acknowledge what I'm going through? We're trying to get his attention as if he's absent, disconnected, busy. When the truth is, what he longs for, what we should be doing is giving him our attention. So this story of Moses that we're walking through, Moses, man, has lived a life. And he finds himself in Midian. He is now the son-in-law to a Midianite priest. He's married and he's attending to livestock. He's taking care of animals. And he's by this mountain, called Mountain of God, or Mount Sinai is his name. And he sees something that captures his attention. He sees a bush that's on fire. But this bush that is burning is not being consumed. I don't care who you are. If you saw that happening, you would stop and pay attention. Like, something's burning but not consumed. What is this? You know, like, I want to know more, you know? So it captures Moses' attention and something happens. The Bible says that he like turns his attention, like he like moves a direction. And the Hebrew words that we get are sir and ra'ah. And you can like say them however you want to. You can sound special or crazy. They're hard to say. It's Hebrew words. But these two words teach us how Moses approaches this burning bush. It says that he turns away from what he was doing. He actually leaves behind his ought to, his obligation, his job. Like what he's being paid to do, he turns from. What he is responsible for at the end of the day to make ends meet, he turns. This is not like for 25 years. He just simply in the moment turns away from and then gives his attention to what he sees. Now, when he does these two things, this sir and ra'ah, when he does them, God speaks. So we've learned something. What we learned first and foremost is that when we give God our attention, this is when we begin to hear him. As we continue today, I want to kind of address one more thing before we get into God actually speaking to us. I believe that before we get to hearing from God on direction or questions in life, there's one problem that we all face and potentially must face. Jesus is actually going to identify this issue, and these two things are tied together. So we're going to hang out in the story of Moses, but we're going to jump really quick to the life of Jesus. And he's going to identify a problem that keeps us from hearing from God. Now, he's speaking to religious leaders where we're going today. He's speaking to religious leaders, and these people are the ones who claim to know God, hear God, and teach others about God. So he's speaking to them. I would say teaching, but teaching implies someone's listening. He's speaking to them, and he says these words in John 8:47. He says, anyone who belongs to God listens gladly to the words of God. But you don't listen because you don't belong. Can you imagine being a religious leader or a Pharisee in this moment? Like your whole life is centered around knowing the words of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Your life is built on knowing God, hearing from God, and leading others to God. And Jesus comes and says, but you don't listen to God because you don't belong to God. Can you imagine how offended they would be? Think for a moment if that was you, how offended you would be, how confused you would be. I mean, you feel like this whole time you've been listening, studying, looking for God, and now all of a sudden you're being told that you can't hear him because you don't belong to him. In fact, that would cause us to question. Maybe you're here today and you've longed to hear from God. You've longed to know his thoughts, for him to share his ways, but you feel like you've cried out on deaf ears. And then you read words like this, but you don't listen because you don't belong. It makes you think, like, do I not belong? This could be so confusing. Well, to this statement, the religious leaders were hot. They were mad. Like angry. I'm trying to think of all the cool terms that kids use today, but they don't work. You know, they were lit. That's not the right word. That's actually, welcome to ADD. So the religious leaders respond in John 8:53. They say these words, who do you think you are? Oh man, I can imagine myself saying that. Someone questions me. Someone states this massive blow to their faith that you don't hear God because you don't belong to God. Their response to Jesus, who do you think you are? If they could say choice words, I bet they loaded him with choice words. I bet they were thinking it if they didn't speak it, right? They were angry. But I want you to know that everything we discussed this morning hinges on the answer to this question. Who do you think you are? We have to know who we think Jesus is, but it's not over. So in verse 58, Jesus answers them. So this thought, who do you think you are? Jesus responds, I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was even born, I am. Now those 2 last words are extremely significant. Jesus says, before Abraham was even born, I am. Now, we're going to come back to this story in a minute, but I want you to know that statement armed the religious leaders. They were ready to take his life immediately. How dare you proclaim I am? So why is I am so important? Why is him saying I am such a big deal? Why would they want to kill him immediately for saying that? I'm glad you asked. So the story continues. In Exodus 3:6, okay, so we've gotten to this place where Moses is kind of in the presence of God. God has spoken to him, Moses, and he's like, here I am. And then he takes off his feet. He takes off his feet. Oh, Lord. It's going to be a morning. Takes off his shoes, and there's a symbolic nature to that. What God is teaching Moses in this moment is that you don't have to cover up in my presence. You don't have to hide from me. You can come close to me. So Moses has come close, he's there, and God begins to speak in verse 6. He says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So he's beginning to proclaim who he is. Moses is kind of locking in. He's literally consumed. This fire is burning, but it's not burning the bush. And now it's speaking to me. Can you imagine the confusion? There's a little bit of me that'd be like, are you talking to me? or is my head talking to me? Is someone watching me? Am I being like, there's no video cameras in Moses' day. At least I don't think there are. So he can't think he's being scammed or watched. He can't think he's being on the next, like funniest home videos. Like he's just there present. God speaks and begins to tell him who he is. And God says this in verse 2. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. It was in this moment Moses became keenly aware of who he was in the presence of. Like he realized, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of God. And I just want to be honest with you this morning. I don't know what you believe about Jesus, God, the Trinity. I just need you to know this. When we come into the presence of God, we become aware of our less than qualities. We could use the word sin. When we come in the presence of God, we realize, oh my gosh, you are holy, I am not. You are good, you make me look like trash. You are wonderful, and I feel depressingly bad. In his presence, because he is so holy, we feel less than. And so what does Moses do? He hides his face. Like this is a little side tangent. When sin is evident in our life, what we do is normal to every single person. We hide. Adam and Eve, the first people to ever make a mistake, mess up, do exactly what God told them not to do what he said not to do. What did they do when they heard God come? They hid. They went and found a place to hide. God can't see us this way. Why? Because sin was present. This is what happens when we sin. So Moses hides his face. He realizes who he's in the presence of. Verse 7, it goes on, it says, then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I'm aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. This phrase, fertile and spacious, is extremely important. God is not only telling us his name, but he's revealing his character to us. He's telling us who he is and what he does. Fertile and spacious is symbolic of freedom. God's saying, I see you and you're being held captive. I see you, you're in slavery. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come and I'm gonna rescue you. I'm gonna set you free and give you your own place of freedom. A place you don't have to worry about people attacking you. You don't have to worry about other lands coming into your place. You're gonna have everything you need because this land is abundant. It's flowing with milk and honey. Everything you need, this land will provide. God is telling us this is what he does. He rescues, he redeems, he restores, and he gives abundantly. What's so crazy about this is in Exodus 3, what God says is what Jesus reveals. Jesus says almost the same thing. I've come to set you free from sin. No longer will you be held captive by the entanglements of this world. I've come to give you life and life to the full, or life abundantly. What God reveals in Exodus 3, Jesus reveals with his life that was free. So it continues. In verse 10, God says to Moses, now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Egypt. This is where the story begins to take a little turn. This is where we start to see the struggle between communication, and we get to see Moses struggle with this idea of, am I hearing you? Like, what's going on? Verse 11 continues. But Moses protested to God, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? Moses is questioning God. His question is, why are you choosing me? You want me to do what? You want me to approach Pharaoh? Like, don't you know who I am? You can speak through a bush. Don't you know what I've done? If I go back to Egypt, if I approach Pharaoh, I'm as good as dead. Moses knows he's a fugitive. Moses is fully aware of what he's done and why he's no longer in Egypt. And he also knows that Pharaoh has not forgotten. If I go back to Egypt, I am dead. So God responds in verse 12. I will be with you, And this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain where he's standing. God is revealing something that we must start to understand. We must begin to practice. When he says, I'll be with you, God is saying that what I'm asking you to do is not about who you are or what you're capable of doing. It's about who I am. He's like, but Moses, I will be with you. Who cares what you can do or what you've done? Who cares about how good you are or how lacking you are? Who cares about the money or the wealth or the status? Who cares? It's all about who I am, God speaking. And I will be with you. But Moses continues in verse 13. If I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? Moses keeps asking questions. It's as if he's playing the role of a lawyer. And he's trying to get God. Well, I got another one for you. Let me ask you this question. Well, if I'm going to go tell them that you've sent me and they ask me who you are, what do I say? Moses thinks he's winning. He thinks he's got him. He goes on, if you think you're going to take care of Pharaoh, what about the nation of Israel, the people whom you love? What about them? They're going to look at me and question me. They're going to laugh at me. They know my story. Moses, in this moment, has these recorded messages playing over and over and over in his mind. That message or these messages are reminding him of his past, and they keep predicting his future. Because of what you've done, you'll never be able to do this. Because of that, nope, he'll never listen to you. You can't do this because that, and that. He's reminding himself over and over again of who he is and what he's done and what he can't do. It would probably sound a little bit like this. God, I've been away from Egypt for 40 years. You say that you're the God of my family, but I'm not sure what family I belong to. I'm a Hebrew-born, Egyptian-raised son-in-law of a Midianite priest. I grew up in the palace of Pharaoh, who taught me to worship Egyptian gods. They, the Israelites, they know it, and they also know that I don't know you. What am I going to tell them? Who do I say sent me? Moses is having this identity crisis, and he's had this incredibly hard life. I mean, think about his life. From being born Hebrew, put in a basket because his mom couldn't take care of him, not because she didn't want to, but because he would be killed if she didn't do this. Rescued by the princess of Pharaoh, raised in the house of the Egyptian king, the most powerful nation in the world, raised as a son of this king to honor him, rule with him, to honor their gods, all the while knowing that he was originally Hebrew, watching his people suffer, killing someone because of what they're doing to his people, fleeing, all these things he's got going on in his head. Over and over and over again, he's replaying these thoughts. He's thinking, you're sending me? I can't do this. When he says the words, who am I? He's not asking out of humility. He's not asking God, can you tell me a little bit about myself? No, he's literally revealing his insecurities. I can't do this. This is not for me. You got the wrong person. What's so interesting about when someone is losing their identity, when someone kind of forgets who they are, the natural go-to is try to find it. Do whatever you can to find your identity. Work harder, change, make life choices, be better, stop doing this. We start seeking out a way to fill our identity. We want to make sure that we are okay or we feel better. What's so interesting about seeking identity is that often when someone's looking for questions to life, why am I here? What's my purpose? Those questions usually lead them to church. Maybe, just maybe, you're here today because life hasn't turned out the way you thought it should. And you've lost a sense of who you are. Maybe you're kind of like Moses. There's these messages playing on repeat in your head, making it impossible for you to hear God speak. That's what's happening to Moses. Moses is longing for something. He's wondering who he is. God's statement that he's going to use him has caused all these things to surface. Like, do you know who I am? Because I don't even know who I am. Like, I don't know where I belong in this world or what my purpose is. He's asking this question because he longs to know who he is. Is it possible that what Moses is going through, maybe you're going through, maybe you've been through it. Maybe, just maybe God is speaking. But those messages in your head, reminding you of who you are or what you've done, reminding you of the things that you've tried or not tried, the mistakes you've made, they're reminding you so often that you simply can't hear God speak. So in this moment, God says something to Moses. In verse 14, he says this, I am who I am. So Moses asked him, like, who do I tell them you are? I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. God reveals his name, and then he's actually going a step further. And this word I am, it's a verb, okay? You can pronounce it H-A-Y-A-H. You can try. Haya, heya. I feel like I'm like doing an Indian chant when I say it. I'm not, but now you'll remember it. Indian chant, hey, hey. Okay. It means to be. What God is revealing to Moses in this moment is he's like, I'm not a God who's been born. I'm not a God who's, been created. I'm not a God who's changing. I simply am. I'm to be. This same statement, when God says, I am, is the statement that Jesus makes in John 8. Just so you know, Jesus is revealing his deity, that he is a part of the triune God, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And he makes the claim, he tells them, I am. To the religious leaders, they knew, you're claiming to be God. Therefore, they didn't believe he was. They were going to stone him to death. And so this I am statement is now crossing generations, okay? God declares it in the very beginning. He tells Moses, I am. And what that means, Moses, is it doesn't matter who you are. It matters that I am. I am enough. I'm greater. I'm over all. I'm in all. I'm before all. I am. It doesn't matter about you, Moses. It matters about who I am. And this is the name he gives them. He continues in verse 15. God also says to Moses, say this, people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. Yahweh in Hebrew means the Lord. It translates literally as he is or he's him. And so when he goes to the nation of Israel, God's telling him, tell the people of Israel, the God who sent me, he's him. He is. Like, tell the nation of Israel, the God that you've looked for, longed for, cried for, he's him. He sent me to you. The God who is above all other gods. The God who stands taller, greater. The God who's listened and heard. The God who's here for you. That's who sent me to you. But this wasn't just for Moses or the nation of Israel. This is actually for us too. Moses' question, who am I? He receives the response of God saying, I am. Moses is like, well, who am I? God's like, it's me. I am. I've chosen you. I've set you apart. I've given you a purpose. Moses wants to know, who am I? What am I here for? What do I belong in this world for? What do you mean to do? I've got all this past. And he's like, listen, it doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is that you know who I am. So it goes on. Moses in this process, he's losing his identity. He's lost his identity. And it's tied up in so many different things. I just want you to kind of see the correlation between what happened to Moses and what happens to us. So often we associate what we have done or what we're doing to who we are. Okay? Moses is doing. Moses is associating what he's done to who he is or what he's incapable of doing. It's always true. Identity assigns significance. It's always true. Identity assigns significance. Think about it this way. How often do you introduce yourselves with not really who you are, but what you do? Hey, my name is Chris. I'm the lead pastor at LifeBridge Church. I just assign my identity to my name and what I do. We all do this. But we are way more than the roles or activities of our life. So often we associate ourselves with the things that shape our lives or shape our experiences. But the truth is, while we are shaped by experiences in life, we're not defined by them. Experiences do not define us. Failure or failing doesn't make you a failure just as much as success makes you successful. Those are just happenings in life. They're outcomes. They're moments. Things that happen, good today, bad tomorrow. There's a guy that I love seeing his life as an inspiration. His last name is Toyota. His first name is unpronounceable. He has this really famous quote. And he said that my life is made up of 99% failures and 1% success. And just so you know, when I say his last name, everybody kind of knows who he is. He's the inventor of the car. We just know, like this is who he is. That's what he's done. But his life was made up of a lot of failing and just a little bit of success. But that's not who he is. Failures, successes, these are just temporary, momentary outcomes. Our life experiences develop the messages that we play in our minds. It's so interesting. In preparing for this series, I spent a lot of time trying to remember, reflecting on my life. When is there moments where I've experienced or I've sit in this or I can recognize it? Because some things I'm still existing in or living in. But I go back to when I was 15 years old. It was freshman year of my high school. I was 14 to 15. And I can replay about a 6-month time, a window in my life that was just brutal. My brother, Ricky, he's 5 years older than me, had just been drafted by the Kansas City Royals and was playing Major League Baseball. And my freshman year in high school, going to the same school he went to, I'd walk in class after class after class and hear these words, "Oh, you're Ricky's little brother." I mean, 1 or 2 times was cool. Yeah, that's right. But after weeks and months of it, I was starting to lose my identity. I was starting to get frustrated and angry. My under my breath responses, "No, I'm Chris. That's my name." Okay? In the same season of me struggling with being Ricky's little brother or in the shadow of a major leaguer for baseball, my parents, they've been doing it my whole life, but I just became keenly aware, started messing up my name. Every once in a while, they call me Ricky. I'm not Ricky, I'm Chris, And occasionally I get the dog's name, oh my gosh, who am I? And this story started working up in me. Well, your brother's good at everything. And he really, honestly, he was. Left-handed, gifted. Every sport he lettered in. I think in his high school career, he had some 50-something letters. I mean, he could letter in chess. He could letter in, I think you can do that. He lettered in everything. Every sport he played. Basketball, football, baseball. He just did it all. And he was extremely gifted. And so every time I heard something like Ricky's little brother, what I heard, what I internalized was, you'll never be as good as him. You'll always be his little brother. You'll always be in the shadow of a major leaguer. And man, it rocked my life. I gave up so many things in that season. Why try if you'll never be as good? Was my motto. Oh, if I'll never be able to do that again, quit. You'll never be that good, quit. Nope, he was way better than you, quit. Because everything in my mind said, you'll never be good enough. Why try? My identity was taken. Now, my brother did nothing, just so we're clear, and this is online. He did nothing of this. He wasn't like, I'm better than you, get over it. No, my brother cared, loved, protected, fought for me. It was incredible. But I was struggling with who I am because I had allowed it to be attached to all the things I accomplished. All the things that I could do were never good enough. Therefore, I was not good enough. And I didn't know who I was. Like, this is a dangerous place to be. This is a scary place. And for many of us, if we're not careful, we will allow our identity to be attached to what we do. We'll allow our identity to be attached to what we've done. And whenever our identity is attached to something accomplished or not accomplished, because identity always assigns significance, we will be in the place of allowing those things to tell us who we are. And we might end up like Moses. And so I want to give us some thoughts to think about. I want us to send us home and kind of like be able to process. So last week we ended with a challenge. Could you spend 5 minutes isolated in just the space of listening? Like not talking, being quiet and listening. Okay, like could you do that? If you're like me, it takes work, it takes practice. I literally, this week, I got quiet. I sit there and I was like just pondering being in the presence of, hey God, if I was sitting in your presence and I was just listening, what would it sound like if I heard you? Like that was my thought process, right? Well, it was so funny. In about 2 minutes of sitting there, I started thinking about this house that I used to own in Cumming, Georgia. This is like 10 plus years ago, okay? And because in that house, I had this really big closet. It's kind of funny. Like it's my favorite house ever we owned, but the closet was way too big. It could have been like another room. I don't know why they made it so big. But as I'm sitting here in my house, quiet, in about 2 minutes, I'm reimagining myself. I'm totally not silent anymore. I'm in my head thinking about that closet and what it was like to sit in it and what it would be like to have it again, like a closet that was like massive. And I mean, within like six minutes, I'm like redesigning my house. And I sit down to be quiet, to be before God, asking him to speak and for me to not speak. It takes work. So last week we challenged you, hey, could you just sit, be still and listen 5 minutes? And I want to add to that this week. I want you to kind of now have a tangible thought as you approach God in silence. And when it comes to personal identity, there are 2 options that you have. You can either try to achieve it or choose to receive it. When it comes to your personal identity, when it comes to who you are, not what you do, not what you're capable of, not what you've earned, not what you've failed at, not your mistakes. When it comes to who you are, you can either try to achieve it or choose to receive it. Hear me out. The trap that many of us fall into, if not all of us fall into at some point in time, is making a name for ourselves. We feel this desire to build our brand, to be a success story, to present to the world something successful. Just so you know, social media has made billions off of this idea because we present to the world our best. No one puts their worst. We post pictures of those vacations that we went into debt for, that new car that we can't afford. You know, we do all that. I'm just kidding. You might not have done that before. But we do. We post the best, the most significant, like, look what's going on. This is what the world does to us. The world has baited us for a trap because the world defines success or significance by image, wealth, status, power. So the more of these things you developed, the more successful you are, the more worthy you are to have listeners, a voice, the more powerful, the more prestige. The wisdom of the world says, man, the better you do, the more successful you are at these things, the better you are, the more you're seen, known, heard. But God doesn't work that way. In fact, God reorients how Moses identifies himself. He reveals to Moses a reverse way of thinking. When God speaks to Moses, do you notice the first thing that he says is not, hey, fugitive, murderer. Hey, you who are unwilling to face up and take responsibility. He doesn't call out all his failures. And he doesn't do the likewise. He doesn't call out all his successes. He doesn't associate Moses with palace or royal family or Pharaoh. Instead, he says these words, I am your God. You were created in my image, and I have a specific purpose for you in all of this. He speaks to the heart of Moses. Moses is like, who am I? And God doesn't validate what he's done or what he hasn't done. God tells him who he is. I am your God, the God, only God. I am above all, in all. I'm before all. I am. And I have chosen you regardless of what you've done, regardless of your mistakes or your failures or your faults or your successes. I have chosen you. I have a purpose for you. God reorients himself. Where Moses is stuck in this cycle of reminding himself of all those things, God's like, those don't matter. What matters is who I am. And he's not done yet. He continues to speak these words over him. I'm with you. That's enough. You don't need anything else. You don't need to prove yourself. You don't need to act right or show. You don't need to go up and confess to Moses or Pharaoh. You don't need to show up and do this task. You just simply need to do what I've asked because I am has chosen you. I've sent you, I have a purpose for you. That's enough. So when it comes to this, achieve or receive, we have to begin to think through the consequences of the choice we want to make. Achieving puts the power in something else's hands. Well, I'm only successful if my job is good. Well, what if your job goes away? I'm only successful if my kids behave. What happens if they grow up and don't? Are you now defined by that? That's the achieving mindset. Hey, I'm only successful if my marriage looks good to the world around me. I'm only successful if I have money. I'm only successful if I get this or have that or live here. What if that goes away? That's the achievement mindset. But the receiving mindset says, I am. Me. It is not based upon what I do or what I accomplish, but simply who God says he is and what he's capable of doing. He's chosen me. He has a purpose for me. So I want to ask you two questions. The achieve or receive mindset. The first question is this. What's on repeat in your head? Moses felt the need to remind God often. Do you remember? Do you know who I am? Not only do you know who I am, who are you? And why are they going to listen to me when I speak you? He had all these questions. He had all these things on his head that kept him from hearing God. What's in your mind? What's being replayed? Is it healthy thoughts? Do they build you up or tear you down? Are they from a trusted source? Are they true? Are they crowding out God's voice and his messages about who you are and how he wants to lead you and use you? What would it look like to replace or disassociate from those thoughts and reassociate with the messages from an I am God? It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. What matters is who I am. What would it look like for you to separate all the things going on in your head and begin identifying with, but this is what matters, who God is? The second thing I would like for you to think through is the achieve or the receive, okay? Are you trying to achieve a self-identity, okay? Would you be willing, and this is a hard thing, would you be willing to receive it instead of achieve it? It's kind of a humbling experience. It actually denounces pride. Just think for a second. What do you associate yourself with? What are the messages that you play in your mind? What are the achievements, self-image, status, title, possessions that you're holding on to that you draw value from? If you're sitting here today and you're like, I really don't have messages in my head, I just want you to know pride is thick in your life. I love you. And I say that because I know myself and I know my pride gets in the way all the time. It's not possible for you to sit here and say, oh, there's nothing going on. I'm good. No. Think about raising children. Think about your job. Think about money. There's always these things that are fighting to communicate your value and worth. And sometimes without even thinking it, we allow it to take over in our life. We allow what we look like, what we present. Like, I joke about this all the time, but it's something I have to get over a lot. I had the most beautiful dirt in the state of Georgia. I love green grass. Like, I want the most thick, luscious yard in the world, but I don't. I've got a few weeds and a lot of dirt. And as funny as it is, there's times where I have to wrestle through, I am not what my yard is, okay? I am not. I start thinking in my mind, well, they probably think Chris doesn't care. Or why doesn't he fix this? Or shouldn't he make me more presentable than this? These are legit. I'm not lying. I'm confessing to you. These are legitimate thoughts that I'll occasionally be like, put that down. You're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve your identity by presenting something that you think is honoring or valuable, that people are going to see you better because your presentation is nicer. But who you are is not based on your presentation. Your value is not in your yard or your stuff or your status. Chris, your value is in that God said, I choose you. I want to use you. I give you purpose and meaning and value, not your stuff, not your faults, not your failures, not your past. Are you like me? Do you occasionally get things misoriented, misdirected? There's a word I'm looking for, disoriented. Does sometimes your priority become self-image or what others think? You see, what's happening in those moments is we're allowing our identity to be determined by them or that. And it's in those moments where we are no longer able to be used by God. We have to move to this receive it mindset. We have to let go of some things we're holding on to. It could be material stuff. It could be real things that we draw from our identity. We draw value from. We might have to let go. We might have to let go of it and say, hey, God, I want who you are to be what I associate with. What you think to be what I draw from. I want my value to be determined by who you say I am, not the world. Because what if what you have disappears? What if what you're drawing value from is no longer valuable? Do you lose yourself in that process? You must choose. Am I going to try to achieve my identity, or am I simply going to receive it? When Jesus spoke those words to these religious leaders, he was telling them something. He was telling them that I am who you need. You see, their whole world was built on the law. If we know the law, if we read the law, if we study the law, then we're the religious leaders and you must respect us. And Jesus is saying, hey, the law can't save you, but I can. The law can't redeem you, but I can. Their identity was placed in something that could not change or save their life, but Jesus could. If you choose to receive it, what you're doing is you're placing your life in the hand of God, trusting him for your outcome. And this is where we'll hear God speak next week. Let me pray for us. Jesus, thanks for the day. Thanks for your truth, for your word. God, thank you for the story of old, that something thousands of years ago could be so relevant today. That a life experience before phones or clocks, before electricity, before cars, before the things that we hold on to in this world, the human experience was so very similar. That we often allow ourselves to be identified with the things of this world. That how people see us could have extreme importance. That our value could be determined by what we have or what we don't have. God, help us. Help us leave the achieving mindset and embrace the receiving mindset. That who we are is not based upon what we've done or what we can accomplish, but who you are, what you've done, what you've accomplished. That through your life, death, and resurrection, you have set us free. That we get to live the life that you offer, the abundant life, not worried about the things of this world, but simply living a life trusting that you know what's best. A life of honoring you and living in life with you. God, help us set down the achieving and embrace receiving all that you are and all that you say we are. We love you, Jesus. Here I pray. Amen. Hey, as we